It's a situation we've all been in before. What? Missed delivery. Do I have to reschedule that package? My Microsoft login. Sure, whatever. Wait, this didn't even bring me to the package site. Oh, It's a tale as old as information security. A user receives a phishing email that looks completely legitimate, or maybe even not so legitimate, but either way, they don't realize it's a fake. It's a call to action. Click the link. So the victim falls for it. They click, they visit. It's at this critical decision point where a user's actions are going to determine whether you have a disaster on your hands or a near miss. Attackers have found millions of ways to trick victims, and once the average user is presented with a realistic login page, muscle memory takes over. If you type in the box, you get what you want. Easy as that. The core reason this attack works is that 1, it's easy to get people to click a link, given the right pretext. And 2, most people don't look at the URL bar to see what site they're on before they type their password. Even if they did, there are plenty of ways to confuse and mask those URLs that the average user will not understand. You could use sneaky subdomains like google.com.somephishingsite.com, or an attacker could use a prefix as a username to a website, such as google.com@somephishingsite.com. Of course, most people don't even know you can do that, and modern browsers will try to stop you. But that doesn't mean people won't click through that warning box. Attackers could even utilize simple lookalikes like google.com with zeros instead of O's. Defenders first responded to these tricks by removing the single factor of using a password only to log in. We introduced both software and hardware tokens to generate random numbers, something only the user should have possession of. This initially seemed like a good idea, but attackers were able to quickly find a way around it. What was that method? Well, they can just ask for the number as well. If they can put up a phishing page, they can quickly relay the name and password and that code to the actual website from their fake site. Once that happens, the attackers have a valid login session just the same. All they had to do was intercept the interaction. We tried showing users prompts asking if they were trying to log in, hoping they'd click no or yes appropriately on their devices. Well, we know how that ended. Attackers who had a name and a password would just MFA prompt bomb people until they clicked yes out of being annoyed, and we saw that work in a number of high-profile incidents. So that method was out as well. What else are we going to do? No matter what we tried, it seemed like there was always a way around the multi-factor auth process. So what other options did we have? We needed a better solution. And that is what we're covering today in the podcast, phishing-resistant credentials in 2024. To discuss this, I went straight to the source, Microsoft, one of the highest profile companies that sees more credential compromise attempts on their customers than likely anyone else in the world. The good news? There are some incredible ways of stopping credential phishing and MFA bypass that now exist, but you have to embrace and enable them to get the benefits. So if you're curious how this works, let's get started and find out how phishing-resistant credentials work on this episode of Blueprint.
I am Mark Morowczynski. I'm a product manager in our customer experience team, and I work with customers on the deployments of identity and security tooling in Microsoft.
And hi, I'm Tarek Dawoud. I'm a lead architect in the same customer engineering, customer experience team. I work on deploying customers like Mark, and also kind of like more complex scenarios, writing white papers and so on. And I've been in the identity division for about 15 years, and in the customer experience team, 10 years.
Fantastic. So could you speak a little bit about what you see from a Microsoft perspective in terms of credential attacks and phishing and how big of a problem that is right now?
I think our former CISO puts it best when he says, attackers don't break in, they get in, they log in, right? So credential attack is basically the number one identity attack, and I think probably one of the top 2 attacks on an enterprise in general. And in that space, there's a very nice resource for your audience called the Microsoft Digital Defense Report, MDDR, or link is aka.ms/MDDR. We publish it every year. And it's a collection of findings from across, obviously, Microsoft Security org in terms of what we see attacks, what we see attacks on our customers, and so forth. And in that one, phishing is obviously by far the most successful attack. So you can see that in 2021, the types of password attacks, just password attacks we saw were a mix of password spray, breach replay, and then phishing. By 2023, phishing was number one by an order of magnitude, like it was basically 90% of attacks. Like the bad guys know that it works much easier than pretty much everything else. And so there is a significant win to be able to tell your CISO, we can't be phished, or phishing is, only 5% effective against us, and so forth. Like to get to that place where you can say most of our users do not type their password on a regular basis. If they saw a password prompt, they'd be like, what is this? They'd call help desk. Or better yet, they don't even know their password, and therefore they can't even type it in the box altogether, is a great state. Like, I think we jokingly in the security world, we jokingly say, like, you're not trying to run faster than the bear, you're trying to run faster than everybody else. That's it. So like the guy next to you, not even everybody else, right? So like if you are phishing resistant and the majority of the ecosystem is still password plus MFA, they're much more lucrative than you. At least, yes, you're still vulnerable to the attackers who are coming after you, the sophisticated attackers and nation state actors who may be coming after your specific intellectual property. But overall, you are going to just sidestep a lot of this noise that keeps your SOC busy with like, oh my God, there's a phishing email that's caused 3 people to give up their credentials. You'll be working on other problems.
That's amazing. Like 90% or so is just one particular vector in. And so, yeah, obviously, you always want to work towards priorities, and that's a mega priority in this case. So with that being the case, right, obviously we need a solution for phishing, and passwords are not going to cut it on their own. So a lot of people started to introduce MFA, and then attackers started to make an adjustment to that. Could you speak a little bit about how attackers responded initially, at least, to the challenge of now they need a multi-factor credential to get in?
I think Mark will remind all of us that even though MFA is compromisable and phishable, it is still better than password, way better than 95% better than password. But true, like and you saw this, the buzz around it in our industry, where Modlishka, I think 3 years ago, oh my God, you can phish on MFA. People discovered that MFA was phishable. MFA was always phishable. It's just people just discovered that it's phishable because the bad guys started running into MFA more. To keep it simple, phishing is I'll put a website that looks exactly like your login page and say, hey, enter your password. You give it to me, and I go to Entra or my IDP, and I put it in, and I'm challenged for MFA. And then what I do is I modify the UI of my website to say, please enter the code you just got. And I take it from you and I put it there, and now I'm through. And unfortunately, the most popular legacy MFA methods, so SMS, voice, and hardware token, as amazing as a token itself may be in terms of crypto, is you'll type in the code, the OTP you see in that UI. All of these under the covers are called, your shared secret. Like the way to prove that you hold the secret is to share something over the channel that carries the proof that you have the secret. Whereas to summarize truly phishing resistant credentials is that there is no such thing. That basically they're all built on this idea that you send a unique challenge to each person or each authentication attempt, and then on the user end side, without leaving the device or going on the internet or anything, something happens that is a PKI interact, a private public key pair interaction that basically signs the challenge and sends it back to you. And therefore, if there's a man in the middle, if there's someone running a website, whatever they get in response, they cannot play back on their session. Their session is different than yours, and that's how it breaks down. But the industry always knew. So this was the origins of the FIDO Alliance. Those who are not aware, the FIDO Alliance, Fast Identity Online, was established because people knew in our industry that MFA is phishable. So they started working on a phishing-resistant second factor. That was the original kind of big announcement with Google and Yubico, for example, the FIDO U2F, right, which was basically the second factor unphishable. So it's the same approach, which is the challenge and signing, but it was just done when after you put in your password, you're trying to do the second factor. And where Microsoft with Entra and Windows Hello and all this stuff, we kind of snapped into two-factor right away. So why not just make it such that you prove that you hold something, and then when you're releasing the signing, you do another gesture on the device. You do a PIN or you do a biometric, you do something else. Therefore, you just did two-factor, not one. Therefore, I don't even have to ask you for a password. And I can satisfy a bunch of regulations and NIST and all the other stuff, right? And so we snapped into FIDO 2.0. which is CTAP 2.0. And this is Windows Hello for Business is a FIDO credential. Passkeys that you hear about today in the news are FIDO credential. The whole industry always knew that this stuff was tough, and this was their answer, is to build this authentication technology that is phishing resistant by design, cryptographically, not just by words. Like you can argue, oh, I send you an SMS and an email OTP. That's passwordless. Yes, it's passwordless, but it's not phishing resistant. Both of them are phishable.
Yeah. And so what is it about these new kind of ways of logging in that are phishing resistant that's specifically different? And for the audience, right, I'm going to be putting the short link to your YouTube video in there. But could you explain a little bit about, I guess, the WebAuthn and CTAP kind of piece and what literally stops it from, being phished and how that works as compared to the old way of doing it?
I also want to start by actually, to the old timers in your audience who, big fans of certificate-based auth. Certificate-based auth was the original phishing resistant credential, right? It is the same concept of, PKI. When I'm trying to sign into a website, there's a challenge that only the smart card can sign on the way back, and I only release the certificate of smart card by doing the PIN or the whatever to release it. Why did smart cards not take off? That's kind of you start with that. Why never take off? Because of PKI. Because deploying PKI was not trivial, and then pushing the certs and the infrastructure to push the certs on the smart cards, buying the smart cards. And so, there's not a lot of smart card deployments out there in the world, despite everybody knowing that phishing is a concern, right? Because it was hard. So the evolution, the innovation, right, the great stuff that the FIDO key vendors made, right, was that the same, maybe not as strong as, but this good enough cryptography was now possible on the FIDO security key, right? That little YubiKey or security. This thing has enough, sophistication in its firmware that it can actually sign or generate a private key and a public key, send you the public key, keep the private one, and sign in, and have, intrusion detection so that if you try to brute force to get to the PIN, it will stop you. All this sophistication was being possible because of obviously innovation hardware, to where you no longer need a PKI. So the foundation of all of that is this whole idea that there is a device in your hand, a computing device that is able to generate a private public key pair. And then the way it works, as you alluded to, is that there are two protocols involved. One is WebAuthn, the other one is called CTAP. WebAuthn is a W3C protocol, so it's a web protocol, just like HTTP 1 and 2. And it is concerned with how a relying party, which is in this case a website, can authenticate a user. So it's the protocol between the relying party and the browser. So the relying party says, I am demanding WebAuthn. The client, the browser knows how to interpret that. And this is why in the early days of FIDO, there was an compatibility matrix where Chrome had it, but, Safari didn't, and you had to wait for it and that kind of stuff. And so that's the dance. The dance is simply how when you get to log into Amazon, how does Amazon publish that I am capable of doing passkey, I am capable of doing FIDO. And when you push a certain button in the UI of the signing page, it actually challenges the browser to say, okay, here's a private challenge. That's what the first step of the part is, that the website sends you a challenge that says, go ahead, sign it for me. And then the second half of the protocol, because it's not a web thing anymore, is CTAP. CTAP is the protocol that is maintained by the FIDO Alliance. It is short for Client to Authenticator Protocol, as the name implies. Basically, it is the protocol between the browser and the actual security key. And in this case, its job is to take the challenge, tell the key, this is from this website, log in at Amazon.com, log in at Microsoft.com. And the way I know this is because it's HTTPS. So it's not because you as an end user read login.office.net instead of .com and surrendered your credit. So no longer you're relying on the end user's cognitive ability to figure out that this is not exactly, Office 365. And so HTTPS guarantees that for you. So it's, again, protocol guaranteed, right? And so the CTAP turns around and says to the key, hey, login at Microsoft.com says, please sign this. If you had previously registered with them, then the key will look up by domain in its storage, find the private key, take the challenge, sign it, and then send the challenge back, and then the browser sends it back to them. So there's nothing for a man in the middle or attacker in the middle or adversary in the middle to intercept and on the way back and forth, because when they go, let's say they intercept your response, let's say, right? When they go and hit enter to log in or Amazon they'll get a different challenge. So the response they intercepted is useless. So that's how it works, kind of in a simple way.
I'm definitely going to post that video so people can kind of see the whole song and dance in detail. And that's the key piece, right? Is the browser is telling the authenticator, like, here, this is the site that I'm on, right? So people cannot be tricked, cannot be phished in that way. And that's a beautiful solution, right? One of the things that I thought of as I was watching that video is, where is that domain name being supplied? And this may be going too deep. I don't know, if this is something you guys have gotten involved in or not, but is it possible, let's say, if an attacker had administrator or system level access to a machine and therefore the memory space of the browser, to like fake, hey, here comes a thing from Microsoft.com, but it's not really, and like somehow craft something and modify where it's coming from and sign it that way? Has anything like that ever been done or thought of?
We can talk about actually the attack vectors on FIDO in general, passkeys, FIDO security keys, Windows Helper Business. They're fairly similar. That one, your local admin machine, you can totally spoof Google. You can spoof everything to the user, so you can get them to give you everything you want. So yes, that one would work. But there actually, I think, do you want to pivot to like, okay, what do we see out there in terms of how people compromise FIDO, even without taking over completely, like DNS, for example, and spoofing login at Microsoft.com? There are actually...
Well, I mean, I guess
barrier attacks.
Yeah, we could kind of go in either direction on that. But as I said that out loud, I'm thinking, well, if you had root access, you just steal the token anyway. So that's actually
steal the token.
Not even really a relevant
just take
thing.
Let them finish the sign and then just take the token off the device, right? That's much easier.
Yeah. So
and that is actually the bigger concern with. So if you're becoming phishing resistant, right, since we're talking to security professionals, right, then you should know what's my next attack vector, because the bad guys won't stop, right? So where am I going to be attacked from next? There's an attack paper published late last year about someone showing that they can intercept, because in the scenario that I played out, the user was already registered. But in the attack that came out late last year, I forgot the name of it, I apologize. But the attacker basically has malware on the device. He tricks you into saying, hey, there's a problem with your FIDO registration, please register again. So he's trying to get you to register again. But because he has malware on the device, when you're registering again, that's the moment when you provide the public key to the website, to Amazon or to Microsoft. When you're doing that part, they intercept and they provide their public key for their FIDO key instead of yours. So they have some other FIDO key unseen to you, maybe, and they beam the public key to the malware. And then they can sign in as you with their FIDO key or their pass key or their Windows Hello from their machine, and they look exactly like you, right? That's an attack vector. But that one, yes, and that one requires that you're inserted at the layer with intercepting the response is CTAP, right, between the authenticator and the browser. You're basically running local admin again, right? But the two more likely attacks, and I have customers asking me about, can people break into the firmware of the keys? I'm sure they can. But attackers are like the river, right? They just flow to where the easiest thing is. So the two more likely attacks are adding another credential because you have a weak bootstrapping. And the second one is the one basically Mark was kind of pointing at, is token theft. Okay, so you got in with your glorious phishing resistant credential, and now you have these amazing artifacts on your machine, refresh tokens, access tokens. Let me just steal those and keep you happy with your credential. I don't want your credential. Right? I'll just take those. The tokens are known, access tokens are called bearer tokens. Whoever is bearing them can take whatever they have, right? So why do I even bother with? So you can pivot to thinking about, yes, you'll have to worry about malware more than phishing, because people will try to put something on the machine to steal tokens somehow, right? And then you have to have good detections of token replay, token, some session theft of types. And Mark can share more about some of the things you can do there. But those will be and then the other one is adding credentials. So for example, I had one of my customers who's highly phishing resistant deployed. Like they have great Windows Helper Business option 100%. Everybody else has passkey or FIDO. So they're okay, they're good, right? And then they hired the red team, and what did the red team do? They attacked the bootstrapping process. They didn't touch any of that stuff. They're like, okay, this is great. We're happy for you. And then they just called help desk and said, hey, I'm a user. I'm stuck somewhere. Can you give me a temporary access pass, which is the way you bootstrap into passwordless in Entra, for example. And they got a tab and they got in. And they just and so it's one of the things I want you folks to be aware of is that adding a credential today kind of an Entra is something you should watch for in general, right? So you can have two FIDO keys. So you can have your FIDO key and unlike a password, if I steal your password or if I reset your password, right? You will know, you will call help desk and be like, oh my God, I can't get in. But a FIDO credential, you can have a FIDO credential that's working for you very happily. And then Mark can go in and add a second one for you, and he'll also be good to your account, and you'll both be content. So your security needs to pivot to that part, right? Adding a credential to an existingly passwordless user or phishing resistant user is a big deal. Who did it? Where did it? Does he have a mobile and we just shipped him a Windows machine? Fine. Or no, he has a passkey and just had another passkey, one from iOS and one from Android. Okay, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Does he walk around with two phones, right? So they have to pay more scrutiny there.
Gotcha. And so that's kind of going where I was hoping to kind of lead next with this. Who are these methods available to? Is it all platforms, phones, mobile, Mac, Windows, or is there some subset right now that people have access to and other things are still being developed?
Great question. So that's actually one of the things that, if you're planning a phishing resistant campaign, understand that your phishing resistant journey is highly platform dependent. So you should have a plan for each platform that users come from. So you will have kind of at large 3 types of. So one is dedicated computing device. I have a laptop. I have a Mac. I have Unix. I'm a developer. I have a Unix laptop, right? And and then the second one is mobile. And then the third one is people who don't have a regular computer. So they have a kiosk in the back of the store. They have a shared machine in a factory. And what's the phishing credential for that? And then the thing you need to decide first is what is going to be your bootstrap credential? What is the credential you're going to start employees or the workforce off with first? So for some organizations, for example, they say the mobile device. All our workforce has mobile devices. We require them to enroll and all the stuff. They get their mail on them, that kind of stuff. In that case, passkey is a great starting credential. Right? So you come in, day one at work, we force you to. Hopefully not force you, convince you to install passkey on your phone, and with high assurance. So none of the phishing resistant credentials I mentioned can be installed in Entra without MFA or some form of MFA, including TAP. But you can't just do it with a password. So you'll install it with high assurance. You have the passkey on your phone, and that's the one you then go to your computing device. So you have a laptop. In your Windows experience, as you're signing in from the beginning, you can actually use your passkey or your FIDO key to finish the UBI, the out-of-box experience of Windows, and get in. Windows Helper Business Wizard can be satisfied with that same credential. So now your other device has a phishing resistant credential on it, and it's bootstrapped by the first one. So that's why it's important to have a bootstrap. Some people don't like the phone, so they will say a FIDO key. I will give you a FIDO external security key. They call them roaming authenticators professionally. And then you walk around with that thing. And then when you go into Windows, you stick your FIDO key in, and Windows understands that one. The UBI will let you in. And the thing we wanted to mention is now we also have a story on Mac with Entra. You actually have the platform credential, which also Mark can expand on, that basically allows you to log into the Mac with a work credential. And then if you do it with MFA, it uses a secure element on the Mac. And it's phishing. If you try to touch ID, it feels a lot like Windows Hello for Business. You're doing a biometric to unlock the OS and go into work and have an MFA claim. All that just happens magically. So think about what's your bootstrap credential? What is that mobile, portable credential that people can walk around with so that they can set up everything else with? And then second, always try to have a local credential on the computing device that the user has. So if it's a Windows, definitely push Windows Hello for Business. Works like a charm. The most widely deployed phishing resistant credential, Entra, just for the record, by far. If it's a Mac, think about the platform SSO credential, right? If it's another platform, it's going to be the FIDO key they're carrying in their pocket because there is no current built-in. So you have to prepare for the fact that the platforms are different, and it will get better over time. So right now, for example, passkey adoption in mobile is only on Android 14, iOS 17. iOS has a good track record of keeping the ecosystem up to date. So most people today are on 17 probably, but Android is not. So you may find users in your organization who are 12 or 10. You just have to wait for them to upgrade their phones. But in a couple of years, I don't think it'll be a problem. In a couple of years, the good news is all the OS makers are now on board with the whole passkey story between Windows, Mac, iOS, Android. I think the only one that's a bit of a question mark is Linux. that would be my advice.
So it seems like there's the question of security and use, which is probably covered, right? Very, very well. There's the registration step. And then there's that very first kind of bootstrap step. One thing I kind of recently run into and was reading a little bit more about that I wasn't as familiar with is the Entra verified ID thing. Is there some tie-in there that would be a solution to what you had listed before with the red team, attacking the bootstrap process, where you can now tie getting that initial bootstrap credential to being the actual human you claim to be through Entra verified ID?
Exactly. Yes, that's exactly why we have it there. It does other things. It can help, with example, with onboarding partners and external identities and other things like that. But in the workforce space, it is the positioning of it is yes, it acts as the bridge between your IAM product, Entra, your identity access management system, and an identity proofing service of some sort. So you can go to Trusona or ID.me or whatever and have them become the bootstrap. So we're trying to remove the humans there. So most people will say, okay, go to an office somewhere, meet, Mark used to call it the Timothy API, right? So go to Timothy in the basement. And if Timothy says you are who you are, he'll give you a tap. And then the tap will be used to register your FIDO credential, right? And that's just not scalable. And COVID kind of, put a lot of Timothys out of a job, right? So I think the verified ID is kind of trying to automate that. So basically you can partner with an identity proof of service of your choice, because it's also country to country. So the reason we don't have why doesn't Entra integrate with Foo? Because in Canada, Foo doesn't work. And in Japan, they have never heard of Foo. So you work with identity proofing of your choice. And they can basically allow the user to carry a mobile credential that says that you are who Foo says you are. And that Foo is the identity proofing service. And then that credential you can then present to Entra, and Entra will put another credential in your wallet that says you are an employee of Contoso. And then anytime you want to come back and reissue your FIDO key again to get a tap, instead of relying on calling a human being on the phone and tricking them and saying, I'm sorry, you can't hear me very well because, I don't remember my password. My manager's traveling, all these excuses, right? Instead of calling people and relying on, again, human cognition, what you do is you go to the identity proofing service. If you lost the first credential, you go to the proofing service to get the credential. If you still have your wallet and it still has the work credential that you got from verified ID, then you can just present that and get a new tap and not have to involve humans at all.
So I'd talked to a couple of friends saying that I was going to chat with you guys today and see if they had any questions, right, based on this. And these are folks that work in the healthcare industry and other kind of people like that, right? Mm-hmm. Fairly large organizations that have the need and want to move towards phishing-resistant credentials. One of the questions that popped up was, I think, kind of a solution that you were just mentioning there a little bit with verified ID. When someone calls up the help desk that's an attacker and says like, hey, I'm a user and I lost my phone and I lost my credential, can you help me reset and add a new device? Is there an official and best practice way of verifying that user is who they actually say they are over the phone in that particular situation?
Actually, so yes, it's not in the Entra product suite, but Microsoft does have a product called Nuance. And Nuance is actually a product we have there that does voice authentication, right? So it builds a profile of your regular user voice and it also has an analysis of is this a common con script? They actually do this digital sleuthing around to find the scripts that bad guys commonly use and try to, and as your agent is on the phone, it actually will give them a signal, a little indicator, yellow, red, green, that this is totally not the person, or yellow, hey, the voice may match, but the script sounds suspicious, that kind of stuff. It's actually a pretty sophisticated tool. It's called Nuance, but it's not part of the Entra suite, but yes, it can help with that.
Wow, that's really cool. I did not expect that to be the answer to that. Very cool. I have to include a link for that as well. The other question was maybe something that's kind of in your wheelhouse or not. And it was more about the culture shift associated with going to phishing resistant credentials. I asked one of my friends, and they're like, at this organization, they said, we still use MFA that's not considered phishing resistant. Seems hard to implement when you've got difficult users. We still have around 200 execs who we can't get to install MS Authenticator. Any thoughts or comments around the common struggles with culture and maybe the technical piece too when it comes to shifting from what we had to these new forms of credentials?
I can add a couple things here and then I'll let Tarek kind of chime in at the end. But I think one of the things that I see sometimes customers get hung up with is that they try to come up with how we're going to solve this for every single scenario. We don't actually start until we have 100% coverage, right? That's a good way to never get anything done. You can make small improvements 10% phishing resistant is better than 0%. 30% is better than 10%. And you roll these changes out kind of slowly over time. And kind of to Tarek's point, there's certain scenarios that are much more easier to do. So Windows Hello for Business with Cloud Kerberos Trust is a easy way to do enrollment of getting Windows Hello for Business on those information workers that are like tied to their laptop. Like that is a easy win. And from a end user experience, they should see less prompts because we're able to satisfy those MFA challenges and things like that. So it's a great end user experience and it's a better from a security perspective. So like that's the place to start. And then you kind of work your way through based on risk and things of that nature. If your executives will not use those types of credentials, someone needs to go explain to them like from a risk perspective, and their choice is always, and we lose to this all the time, which is do nothing, accept risk and do nothing. And that's what they're maybe doing. Either they don't realize they're doing that, but that's pretty much what's happening. And you explain like, look, okay, so you have access to all this sensitive information. Are we okay if something is compromised or something like that? And if they say no, great. Here are the choices we can do to kind of move you forward. So, but I know, I'm sure some listeners are thinking, man, I would love to get to some of this stuff, but I have this LDAP server that so-and-so uses, and there's a mainframe here and all this other stuff. That's fine. Leave that stuff till the end. Make progress where you can and get to these like incremental wins. And those, like that will have gravity in your environment because you'll say, you do these reports out. So we're 65% phishing resistant. And we're going to do this other group, and then we're going to be 85%. And then someone goes, well, what's it going to take to get to 100%? And you go, well, here's all the ones that so-and-so refuses to install the Authenticator app, or all those different things. You get to start surface those up in your environment. Anything to add, Tarek?
No, plus 100. I think the...
100. It's my highest score ever with Tarek.
Exactly. Like, I think it's important to understand that you're not trying to boil the ocean. We're going to take the wins where you can. I have bad news for your people, which is the easiest people to get to passwordless are not the IT people. It's everybody else.
Yeah.
So we're kind of like the worst. Like I have a customer who has started scrambling passwords on-prem. That's how phishing resistant they are. They're not, comfortable removing the password UI altogether, but they're going and they're actually scrambling your AD password because most of your apps are modern. You're doing phishing resistance, and then the only people that can't scramble is actually IT because of scripting and PowerShell and things running in the background, all that stuff. So we're kind of a laggard. So to his point, right? So your mobile workforce that is on modern devices, that is out there accessing SaaS apps, there is no excuse not to make them phishing resistant today. None whatsoever. Like you should start working and thinking about this. And yes, there will be 5 execs who won't do it. There will be, 10 laggards here and there, but don't stop because of that, because it is a journey and you will have to build confidence. The other I think I was going to add is more give incentives. So passwordless, the way it adds up to something. I want to enforce MFA on my apps. That's the first thing. So this is how Microsoft got me, for example, in 2017, when we rolled out Windows Hello for Business with Tarek, right? Tarek was annoyed by the MFA prompts. So we would have MFA enforcement for all of Microsoft SaaS apps, and I would hit Exchange or SharePoint or Teams or whatever. You'd get these MFA prompts every now and then between the apps, and it was annoying. And then Windows Hello for Business came, and I enrolled in it, and I started using it, and then lo and behold, I'm not doing any MFA at all. At all. I don't get a single MFA request from Windows Hello for Business. Why? Because on the machine itself, every login that phishing resistant satisfies Azure AD MFA or Entra MFA, right? And so that's the carrot instead of the stick, right? The carrot is, hey, if we do this, nobody will see an MFA prompt on any device that has a phishing credential, and it will just be magic. Everybody will be happy, right? So that would be, as you say, on top of don't try to boil the ocean. Go 80%, 20%, whatever you can. Just do some progress.
I love that advice. That's something I'm always saying in class is like 10% is better than 0, 20% is better than 10. Just chip away at it, right? No matter where you can, one environment is better than 0. That's what it takes. The other question I had from people is just kind of general curiosity around legacy apps, right, that don't natively support it. Is there any new developments or other kind of easy solutions that you would recommend and point people to help ease the pain of trying to get this to work with legacy apps?
Depending on how legacy you want to go. So LDAP is indestructible. NTLM is indestructible, meaning they both have the password in the fabric of the authentication gesture. So therefore, if you are trying to go passwordless phishing resistant, then they will always be in the path. So obviously, your challenge there would be more to move away from those apps as much as you can, or scope them down. Like I know one customer who was trying to go phishing resistant, but then their security team's interpretation of PCI compliance was that you had to rotate your password every X number of days. So what they did is just put those people in a separate forest and kept them with passwords and with the PCI apps, they just put them over there by themselves. And then everybody else was just, they started basically relaxing the password policy, removing the password change, because those are the things that can catch you. Is you're a fully passwordless user. As Mark said, you're doing cloud Kerberos trust. You're hitting on-prem apps, cloud apps, both of them just fine. But then all of a sudden Windows says you have to reset your password every 30 days or 90 days. And you're like, what is my password, right? The good news is Kerberos is modernizable, right? So Kerberos, you don't have to kill your Kerb apps. As Mark said, with Cloud Kerberos Trust, your authentications to Entra, the modern authentications you do, are translated by the trust. That's why it's called the trust, because basically this is how on-prem trusts the cloud. And so we had the old certificate trust, which was based on certificate PKI. You had the key trust, and then the easiest and most modern and most elegant is Cloud Kerberos Trust. Every login to Entra comes back with a partial TGT, and then that partial TGT is used by the OS to find your nearest domain controller and hit that and get a true Kerberos ticket to then hit the resource. So that's the good news on the legacy protocols is Kerb. But NTLM and LDAP from authentication perspective and then everything newer like SAML and OAuth is fine.
Yeah, I mean, some of the other stuff there's like third-party products where like there's a shim that does like a network capture and stops it and fronts it and things of that nature. But there's limits. The protocol itself doesn't support it, right? So like you either going to need to modernize the app, you put something in front of it as like a shim, or then you put like the other opportunity is like, oh, you have to go to like an RDP AVD and you do that, phishing resistant into that, and then you can only access it from that type of segment and things like that. So it's all these kind of like, shims, something in front, or network segmentation, usually type of thing.
That was a good call out. Header-based apps. So header-based apps are apps that don't even think about authentication. And that one, I just wanted your audience to know that we have our own app proxy does header-based stuff, and as well as other like F5 will do it for you. Like basically, you have an app that's predates even LDAP authentication, or just relies on a header that says who the user is, then most of these can do modern auth with Entra and then spoof the necessary headers to the app. So you can get rid of the password for header-based apps.
Awesome. We've talked about a little bit of the mechanism that can solve some of these problems, the prevention of the issue. I want to shift a little bit to detection of when these attacks happen or when there is an attempt at doing those sort of things. What are SOC analysts and the average kind of security person looking for when it comes to credential-based attacks? What are the core log sources that any security person is going to have to pay attention to there to spot when someone has done an adversary in the middle, site cloning style attack?
I mean, I think the primary one would be, the sign-in logs, which you should be taking a look at and pushing that out to your SIEM of choice, or using something like Log Analytics to kind of look through that with some workbooks. And then in terms of, to Tarek's point, if, once they kind of get on and they add a credential, that would be in the audit logs, because that's a change to the state of the directory. We have some KQL available. If you go to github.com/KQL-MSPress, we have lots and lots of KQL pre-made stuff for you. And one of the ones in there does talk about looking for those types of audit logs and how to look for that, as well as looking at like authentication campaigns and stuff like that. So we'll put that in the show notes, but those are your primary sources. And learning KQL, I think, is a really strong skill that you're going to want to build, especially if you're going to live in the Microsoft ecosystem and you're not sending your logs to like a Splunk or something like that, where that has its own similar languages and stuff like that. But like you're going to need to be able to know how to parse through this, because you will see a lot of data, especially if you're in a larger environment.
For the folks who may be not super familiar with sign-in logs and audit logs and kind of like the risky sign-in logs and all that sort of stuff, and then the KQL obviously associated with it, could you give us a quick kind of rundown of what those things are, and then how KQL is going to be the tool of choice and enable you to easily go through those sort of things to find this sort of stuff? Yeah,
I mean, we talked about it on the last time I was on the show about going through all the log sources, but just a quick one. There's the sign-in logs, which is the interactive sign-ins. There are refresh tokens. So these are the non-interactive sign-ins. That's a very, very chatty log, because it's every time a refresh token is used to get an access token. There's audit logs, which is anything that changes state to the directory. There's going to be service principals. So these are applications that they do authentication as well. Those have their own sort of logs. And then there's a special type of service principal called a managed service identity, where the credential is not exposed and it's managed by the service. That has its own set of logs. And then there's also all the risk logs. There are sign-in risk, which is impossible travel and things of that nature, as well as user risk. And there's also application risk. So like the good example we sometimes use is that if, let's say, a developer accidentally checks a secret into GitHub, right, exposes that secret, that gets picked up by identity protection and will notify you, hey, this app looks like it's at risk, and maybe you want to take action on that. So those are all log sources that are in Entra ID, and you can send all of those log sources to an external SIEM using the Event Hub, or you can send them to Log Analytics, and that's what Sentinel is built on top of. And the language you would use to parse through all that is called the Custo Query Language, or KQL.
For someone who wants to learn KQL, where's a great place to start with that? I know you have a bunch of built-in things, but learning the actual language itself, any recommendations there?
Tarek, do you have any recommendations on how to learn KQL?
I think there's a book I heard.
I may have been leading the witness there.
Yeah. Okay. So if you're familiar with Splunk, there is actually documentation that's like Splunk to KQL, and it kind of shows you like how you do similar stuff. But if you're not familiar with KQL at all, there is a book called The Definite Guide to KQL that myself, Rod Trent, and Matthew Zorich wrote, as well as Carissa Cutmans, who was our technical reviewer. She was my co-host last time I was on this talking about logs. And it really walks you through, if you don't have any knowledge at all about KQL, how to kind of get started. It gets into more advanced things like doing parsing and table joins and all that kind of super fun stuff. And then it also goes into doing some things around like threat hunting and how we look at like incident response and stuff like that, some of the later chapters. And all the queries are up on that GitHub that I just mentioned before, so you can take a look at those. The other way to sometimes learn KQL is there is pre-built workbooks in the portal today. Like you can go click on a workbook and it will show you sign-in errors and stuff like that. And you just click edit and you can see the raw KQL underneath and start to kind of parse it together that way as well. But yes, the book should hopefully, if you have no experience or you are an expert, there's probably something you can learn in there. Go ahead, Tarek. You said you wanted to say something.
I was going to just emphasize that if you are going to work with Azure in general, so then KQL is a life, even in security, because you don't just need KQL to parse Entra logs, you need to also parse Azure Monitor logs in general. So what's happening on the machines, patch level, all that stuff comes in some form of basically logs, and KQL is the language of querying Azure Monitor as a whole. And I did want to say graph activity logs is also another.
So that's a good one. I forgot about that. Yeah.
That's basically all the reads in your tenant, not all the writes. The writes are in the audit log, the reads are in the graph activity.
Can be very chatty as well.
Yes. Oh, I'm sure. For the students who may be listening out there, I'm actually going to be talking to a recent cybersecurity graduate student tomorrow and kind of giving them some mentorship and ideas on how to progress in their career. One of the questions I obviously get from people like that is like, I don't work for a company yet. How do I get practice with these sort of things when I don't have a real enterprise environment that I have full of logs? Is there any kind of tools or sample data sets that you're aware of that people could use to kind of get their hands on this?
From a KQL perspective, there is a sample set of data that anyone can go use and play with. You just have to have a Microsoft account. So that's an MSA type of account, the thing that you'd maybe use for your Xbox sign-in or anything like that. So you can get in there and start parsing through some of those logs. There are, I believe, like test tenant type of developer tenant stuff that kind of spins up for a small period of time, and you can kind of play around with stuff like that in a lab.
There was another thing that I had seen at one point as well. It was like a KQL challenge website. I don't know if either of you are familiar with that.
Oh, Custo Detective Agency?
That's the one.
Yeah, so Custo Detective Agency, it's like kind of like a capture the flag, but for defenders. There's something afoot. You have to use logs to uncover whodunit kind of a thing, and you get credly badges and stuff like that. Yeah.
Very cool. Yeah, so it's one of those, chicken or the egg problems. Like people want to be able to say, I know KQL on their resume, but until they have a job and get to sit in front of a real data set, sometimes it's hard to do that if there isn't those practice resources. So I will definitely get those links and put those in the show notes as well. On the topic of KQL, is there anything about the language or the way that people use it for security, searching, and visualization that is maybe unexpected, different, better, unique compared to some of the other SIM search languages out there?
I think the thing that's a little bit, it's really, really powerful is it can do, it's scaled out cluster-wise in the cluster service, but you can go through a lot of data and really narrow things down based on time and certain things. And then the other part that we also have in this book that I think Tarek can really talk about is joining multiple sources together, right? So it's not enough just to say that hey, this is a risky sign in and you caught that. But you can see that. And they also came from a device that you've never seen them come before. And then they made a change in the directory. And like you can start to really, that's kind of the power, right? Is that you start to have all these different data sources. They're all available to you. And you can start to kind of join them together and really get a tremendous amount of insight where like you might have disparate data sources and trying to connect them in your tool. So I think that plus the time-based stuff that you're able to really like dig in deeply and filter out lots of data quickly is like one of the superpowers of KQL.
I think what people don't quite always grasp is that KQL is not simply another language like SQL. It is actually a technology that actually speeds up joining and searching across data sets. The language actually looks a lot like SQL. There's also selects and wheres, so not unfamiliar. But the reason it's not exactly SQL is because it's super fast in joining different data sets. And so if you're trying to cross-reference two different data sets, it's actually way more efficient than if you would have done a join. And
is there anything either of you have seen done with KQL by maybe a security team that you were just completely amazed by? Like wow, I didn't know you could do that. I'd never thought of that. Any kind of mind-blowing, brilliant ideas that you could pass on to listeners that they may have not thought of?
I mean, I think I've seen people build dashboards out of this in their reporting and start to show like, things like, where am I getting the most prompts in my environment and stuff like they take those types of things. They do monitoring around that. Like when we see a drop of like X percentage in sign-ins and things like they really can automate that and they build dashboards with it. And there's like, I've seen that a few times.
So I come from more of the resilience background than security like Mark. And so in the resilience background, yeah, you see all the time. Like our live site is entirely run from KQL in Microsoft. So when live site engineers are trying to figure out what's going on, where is the degradation, they're mostly just running KQL. And you can just see in runtime, you can just be able to see like, okay, top 10 failing apps. Okay, now sort them by region of the failing data center as well. So add the data center as a factor. Okay, then sort by the most impacted tenants. And so you're just able to get to the truth so much faster when you're not watching a spinny thing spin for, 5 minutes. Instead, it's like, 5 seconds. It just helps you get to the truth faster.
Yeah. Speed of search is critical when it comes to chasing down, state-backed attack groups that can rip through an environment in like 20 minutes, right? If you're waiting minutes on a search, then you only have a couple moves before they're done. So
it just changes your mindset from what you can do in real time versus you tell your management, these things we can, SLA is 5 business days to get back an answer or stuff like that.
Right. Yeah, very critical stuff.
Do you want to do auth strengths real quick, Tarek? I think about enforcing the methods.
Yeah, I think, the journey is in people's mind is you start off with hydrating the phishing register credential. So that's the thing. Like I want people to think in terms of it's not all or nothing. Because I talked to a customer about phishing resistance and they say, but I can't turn off the password on this app. It's needed. Okay, you're at step 5. Do you realize you have to actually do a bunch of things to get to the problem you were talking about? Meaning, first one is hydrate passwordless credentials in your environment. Do your users have a phishing register credential that they can use if they wanted to? So one of the biggest things most of your audience can do today is if you have an intro tenant today, please go enable FIDO and passkey. It's an authentication method that's turned off by default right now in your tenant. Meaning, if you have a security conscious user who got a gift YubiKey or Talis FIDO key at the BlizzCon, right? At the security booth or some vendor booth, right? Let them register and use it. It's a much better credential than whatever you're giving them. I find sometimes people will be like, but that's not what we're using. I get the concern about help desk training and help desk will be like, FIDO key? What the hell is a FIDO key? We didn't give you a FIDO key. But allow the ones who are at least security conscious. So the first step is just, one, get out of the way of your users. So enable FIDO credentials where possible, especially for your IT admin and stuff. They know what they're doing. Let them use that better than anything else. Second, hydrate in the ecosystem as a whole. So for your information workers, people with mobile devices, encourage them to enroll in either passwordless phone sign-in, passkey, Windows for Business for your information workers. Just let the ecosystem get used to using them first. And then the third one is nudging. Right now, you will have to nudge people to passwordless. There's a couple of experiences where, and some of these are enhancements on our side that we're fixing. But in the meantime, you go, the first time you go to enter as a user, and we will always show you the last successful use credential. So if you were a password plus MFA user and you just added amazing FIDO key with FIPS-2 compliance, the next time you open a login page, what are you going to give you? Password. because that's what the last one you used successfully. Unfortunate. So we're fixing that. But in the meantime, you will have to kind of nudge them. You have to tell them, hey, well, how do you find the FIDO login? Oh, click other ways to sign in and do that. And then once you've done it, now it becomes your most recently successful method. And then enter also suggests, FIDO going forward. So these are baby steps. And then to his point, after you get to enough hydration, you use the logs, you use KQL to see, I see a lot of registrations, and then I see a lot of sign-ins. You can actually, in the sign logs, you can actually see what method they used, right? So you feel confident that, 80% of this target group is already using passwordless. Then to his point, you can go to the conditional access and you can create enforcement. You can say, okay, tomorrow, everybody going to Exchange Online has to be coming from a phishing resistant method. And that categorization and conditional access will include Windows Hello, Mac SSO platform, FIDO keys, pass keys, but nothing weaker. Anything cryptographically weaker will fall out. So SMS, voice will be push notification, even will fall out, right? And that way, if they come with a weaker credential, they will just be guided to an experience that says that, that's good, but not good enough. Please go back out. And it will suggest that they sign in again. So think about these phases, but absolutely enforcement is obviously the nirvana you want to get to. Is to be say, you can't get to this resource without a strong credential.
Yeah, I mean, I think once you have that, monitor for when people are coming from weaker ones, like that might be an indicator that maybe something else is bad is happening, right? Or someone's maybe not following the right practice, but like that's kind of the next step. Once you got the enforcement, look for those, those failures of that, like what, who is failing, why, go find out, like be curious, dig into those logs and see like, hey, what's going on over here.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. There's some really important information in here. I'm sure listeners are going to love hearing all this and getting all the links you guys gave out. So I'll be sure to get those in the show notes. And thank you so much for joining Blueprint.
Thank you very much, John.
Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to getting that smoking jacket.
Yep.
5 times.
Number 5, we'll get you right up in the next season, season 6. You're going to hit the milestone and be way ahead of everybody else.
I'm ready. I'll send you my measurements.
At 4, you should give him a baseball cap, a White Sox baseball.
We can get one of those made up too. All right, awesome. Thanks, guys. So I don't know about you, but the more I heard from Tarek and Mark, the more excited I got for the actual future where many of us will be rid of the threat of password phishing. Imagine how nice it would be to work in a SOC that never has to deal with incoming phishing emails trying to steal credentials. In fact, some of us are there right now, and hopefully that serves as inspiration to everyone else that it is possible to get there. Also, how cool is it that some companies further along on this journey are actually actively scrambling user passwords so that no one even knows what they are, and everything still works great? That's a place your company can get to in the foreseeable future, one where they can't give their passwords away because they don't even know them. That's awesome. Though on top of that, the availability of verified digital identities we can carry on our phones and digital verifications of employment, and with that in place, not only can we reduce the need for manual help desk calls for password resets and assistance, but more importantly, we further reduce the threat of help desk phishing. Everything about this just seems like an amazing place to be, so I hope your organization is going in this direction. If you didn't know about these opportunities before, now that you have this knowledge, you should do your best to communicate these benefits to anyone that will listen and help make them a reality at your company. Paint them the picture of the safe, passwordless, and more convenient future that awaits once you move in this direction. Of course, all this doesn't mean we can sit back feeling completely secure. Back to advice for detection. I also love that Tarek pointed out that attackers are like a river. That is the perfect analogy that defenders need to remember. For this situation, once you plug one hole, the activity is going to flow to the next easiest option. They call out some of those options, like token theft, bootstrapping, process attacks, and how we need to be sure to watch for credential registration anomalies after we hit the point of being phishing resistant. There were some great resources and explainer videos with further detail I've included in the show notes if you'd like to dive deeper into that technology, and I hope you do. 2 final things I'd like to call out. One is that the last chance to take a course with me this year is right around the corner. If you'd like to join, check out SANS CDI in Washington, D.C. starting on December 13th. It's really, really close, but I'll be teaching Sec 450 there, so if you'd like to join in, now is your last chance. The second thing is that the podcast now has a feedback mechanism built into the show notes where you can send a message directly to me. It can be feedback about the show or even better, ideas about topics or people that might be great to have on it. Don't be shy to use that link if you'd like to let me know what you want to hear about on an upcoming episode. Again, thanks for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of Blueprint.